All right, Jay Dyer is with us. We're discussing morality, I guess how it applies to society today and how it can be, how it's so vital to, I guess, how a society functions. Jay, if you could kind of give us a little spiel on what your view of society's take on morality, or how society needs to form an objective morality, or just kind of give us your general thoughts, sort of surface level going in.
Yeah, I'd say every society has some organizing ideal or principle or higher level notion that it organizes around, and it's kind of unavoidable. And if you don't have that, you kind of have social breakdown. We're seeing that now in the modern era and in the U.S., obviously. So it's kind of unavoidable to have some notion of objective moral principles. There might be an area to which morals and ethics has a malleable component, taboos, these kinds of things. Cultural things change over time, but there has to be kind of basic principles that are unchanging. So, things like the Ten Commandments, this kind of stuff, if you believe the Christian worldview, those can't change or evolve or become the opposite of themselves or whatever. So every society needs these kinds of things for its own health and well-being. So you can't really form a society on completely relativist, subjectivist principles. It'll break down.
So how would we convince our society, or essentially shift our society in the right direction to unite behind one principle? Like in the sense of, let's say, murder, right? You have some people who believe that murder is okay in certain situations. You have, I guess, religions that believe murder is justified for people who are of different sexuality, stuff like that. So if we had to convince our society, and of course it would take a long time, I'm assuming, but how would we go about that?
Well, that's part of what I do. So Apologetics has in part the goal, at least, of trying to convince people of the position that you hold. So a lot of what I do is debates. It's the defense of and the offense, actually. So the unique approach to apologetics that I do isn't just defensive, it's also offensive, because we're not just defending our views, we're also objectively and aggressively going on the offense to critique the other positions and the other worldviews to see if they're coherent, if they have explanatory power, and if they can offer any justification for their beliefs. So the number one goal, and it's not going to happen maybe in our lifetime, but the goal for me, is to promote Orthodox Christianity as the ultimate big picture, because I don't really think you can have ethics or morals, this kind of stuff, without a whole worldview and paradigm to go with it.
All right, so me and a couple guys were talking about this the other day. We're at a Christian university. It's non-denominational, but we have a weekly, essentially, session with a community group, and we kind of reflect on, how our lives are going, certain questions that were raised by our campus pastor, and we were arguing the moral justification for, let's say, burning down a abortion clinic that no one's in, but like what we were arguing was at what point, and if you're looking at like BLM and people burning down your cities, at what point is it okay to retaliate in a sense, like Kyle Rittenhouse did? At what point does essentially self-defense or cultural defense become necessary, do you believe, and how do you justify that way of thinking, in a sense?
I don't think there's much point in trying to engage in those kinds of actions, until it comes to you as an individual, because those kinds of actions don't accomplish anything. It doesn't further your goal to, even though you might come up with different theories that you think justify preemptive action or something like that, like Bush's preemptive war doctrine or something like that. But the problem is that it doesn't achieve what your goal is. So I don't think those kinds of things are beneficial. I would always say don't do that kind of stuff at all. But that's why it's like action, that's kind of the Marxist idea, is that if you take this kind of radical action, you can achieve more change by radical action. But I don't believe that action is what achieves change. I mean, if the action is being done without theory, it's useless, right? So Marxists will engage in praxis, where they think that action is actually more important than theory. I would say it's the other way around. Theory is more important and informs and conditions action. And so that's why we have to have the right worldview, the right paradigm, the right theory before we go about doing action. Otherwise, our actions are all going to just be all over the place and crazy and askew. So that's why I do apologetics, because it's more important to convince people of the higher principles, the spiritual principles, and hopefully they experience a change of their heart and mind, rather than trying to do external actions of physical violence or anything like that, because that's not gonna do anything.
Do you think that, and this is kind of off topic, I would say to some degree, but do you think that, let's say Trump sent in the National Guard to all these cities, or there were like 5 Kyle Rittenhouses in each city, do you think that would at least diminish the amount of violence by BLM, or would it increase it, or would it stay the same? If you just had to guess, I guess.
I think the administration is probably playing a dangerous game of attempting to allow things to continue so that they can have the justification for reelection. They probably think that these actions are strong indicators to help him bring about a reelection. I'm just stating what I think is the facts in the modus operandi of what's going on. I think that they probably reasoned that if they sent troops in, either one, maybe the troops wouldn't listen, or they wouldn't follow the orders, or they probably thought that it would be just spun in the media as a fascist takeover or something like this. So they probably studied it out and felt that the more advantageous course would be to let the opposition give the appearance of being extremely radical and therefore un-American, and that this would help actually ensure re-election.
Letting the world burn, essentially.
Well, I would say to a controlled extent. I don't think that they're worried about, but this is happening primarily in areas that are Democrat governors and Democratic states. So it's sort of like, well, you're going to get what you chose. If that's the choice that you made with your election, then you're going to get that. You're going to have to deal with it, and that will be a great example, like a living example of why Trump will be reelected, is what his administration will argue.
What is the first thing, I guess, and I know it's very a broad thing, but if you were to try and convince a non-believer or even a non-Orthodox Christian to be Orthodox or to be Christian, if you had to try to raise arguments that would lead them to believe in this stuff, what would you do to a non-believer? What would you say to them?
Well, the first argument I would make is a version of transcendental argumentation, where I would point out that everybody acts as if and assumes that there are morals, right? So even though in theory they might reject objective morals or universal moral standards and categories, in actual practice, everybody lives and operates like there are morals, right? Everybody's mad if they get their property stolen, or if somebody kills their relative or something. It makes people mad because they feel that there was injustice done. But if we live in a purely chaos materialistic universe, there's no such thing as injustice. It's just personal tastes and preferences. So so what? So you didn't like the fact that your grandma, your granny got killed. Well, but I mean, the universe doesn't care what you like or don't like. It doesn't matter. So, if that's the case, then I would say that's an initial kind of indicator, a signpost, a pointer to the fact that, well, maybe there aren't purely relativistic, subjectivist morals. Maybe there are objective moral standards, and so that begins us on the path of reasoning towards how there have to be kind of immaterial standards, these kinds of things. And if we look at what morals are. Morals aren't identical to anything material or physical. Universal laws of logic, numbers, math, these kinds of things aren't identical to stuff, to physicalism. And so therefore, I think that suggests that there are immaterial abstract objects, categories, etc. And if that's the case, then it stands to reason that those immaterial abstract objects have to be somewhere. They have to be grounded and interlocking somehow. And that's where we start getting into how we need a divine mind to ground all that stuff. So that's the kind of argument that I would make typically towards somebody who was just kind of a basic atheist.
Someone had made a really interesting argument recently, and I thought it was kind of eye-opening to me specifically. I recognize the idea that an objective morality, of course, is important to a society thriving. And I mean, like you said, if morality is subjective, then basically nothing really matters, in the sense that, well, here's what the argument was. We'll get into this. Is someone had made the argument that if you have a problem with certain types of speech and you label it as hate speech and stuff, that in and of itself is a Christian sort of mindset, because you have to recognize that it's wrong to say these to a certain person, or you have to love your neighbor or something like that. So I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Let's rewind it. I'll make it an even simpler argument to this. I'll just say, look, if you look at what I would say a worldview or a paradigm is, it's just the basic assumptions in the three areas of philosophy: knowledge, ethics, and metaphysics. So knowledge, what we know; ethics, right and wrong; metaphysics, what's real, what's not real, what exists, what doesn't. In each of these categories, they all interrelate and necessitate one another. For example, I can't make a statement about what exists without also having a knowledge claim, right? So if I say the world exists, I also am assuming to have knowledge that the world exists, right? So that's at once a statement about metaphysics and an epistemic claim to know something exists. And it's also, in a sense, implicitly ethical, because I'm assuming in that statement that the statement is true. And if I'm assuming it's true, then there's an assumption that we ought to follow what is true as opposed to what is not true. So ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology always interrelate with one another. They always are kind of implicitly, necessarily assuming each other. So there's no way to really start talking about the world or explaining the world or making the sense of ethics or what we can and can't know without understanding these kind of basic philosophic principles and categories. And when we start looking at those, we notice that we have all of these assumptions, even in simple claims, even in saying things like the tree is green, right? We make a host of assumptions about how things are. And there's a host of assumptions that you could call preconditions for the possibility of how things could be. And so those we call transcendental categories. And when you start looking at those, they're just a sort of a higher level, meta level look at logic and what is and isn't the case. You start to realize that the world is highly structured. The world, for it to function, to have knowledge, we need a certain type of world to be the case, right? We can't have total incoherence world. We can't have the world where all of reality is, a dream. Everybody is just a projection of my psyche, all these kinds of nonsense, new agey types of views, or everything is one thing, man. These are easily sort of demonstrably refutable views on their own grounds. So that the strongest types of arguments that you can make are the arguments that on the opponent's own grounds lead to the impossibility of knowledge. So that I'm not just saying if you critique somebody's view of some fact and you disprove them, I'm saying an even nuclear strength, more powerful argument than that is to show that their position actually precludes the possibility of knowledge at all. And that's why transcendental arguments are so much more powerful. So they're much stronger than these kind of typical lame arguments that you hear by standard sort of Josh McDowell or Lee Strobel or these kind of normie apologists that try to defend Christianity, the arguments are really weak. They don't really defend the Christian paradigm. They're very weak arguments, and they're not arguments made at a paradigm level. So that's why I think you kind of have to reorient people's thinking towards presuppositional thinking outside of just kind of generic basic bitch evidentialism.
How does the law of the land relate to morality, in the sense that, because of course you have to legislate some morality, right? And that's of course based on objective morality, in the sense that you make it wrong to kill people. But a lot of people argue that law and morality, I mean, obviously there can also be unjust laws, but that's also in a sense subjective, because some people think it's right to legislate abortion, some people don't. But how does law need to relate to morality, I guess?
Right. Well, the Christian response to that is the history of the church's relationship to the state for the last 1,700 years, right? So in the first 300 years of Christianity, the church is persecuted by the Roman Empire. So there's not really a church-state relationship per se. They're on the outs. But then by the time of Constantine and Theodosius and Emperor St. Justinian, you begin to get the Christianizing of the empire, and the empire's legal code begins to literally reflect more and more over time Christian ethical biblical principles, especially when you look at the Code of Justinian. And this will be very formative for Byzantine law, Byzantine legal theory, what's called canon law. Canon law is church law, and in both the East, in Byzantium, and in the West, in the Latin, what will become the Roman Catholic Church, canon law takes on a very important social factor where you have the church as an institution and organization basically speaking to, correcting, or even failing to correct at times the state in different European countries, Byzantium, whatever. So for us as Orthodox, there's a very unique approach to this because we have a long history of canon law. And so we would see the two powers, you could say, church and state, they work together. They're supposed to work in symphonia and harmony and synthesis. They're two separate institutions, but they work together. The church limits and actually ordains the state. The church has the historic ritual, what's called coronation, where it's a sacrament basically, where the church anoints the ruler, the monarch, the emperor. And so that's the ideal system of the relationship of church and state. So the law of the land has to be brought into concert with church law, because for us, the law of the church is the higher order, right? So there's a hierarchy. Church is above the state. We don't believe that there should be no state, but church is above the state. So the church tells the state to what degree the law of the land should reflect biblical principles. So there is some degree of flexibility there, because not every land has the same or nation or region has the same cultural practices and so forth. So there's areas of flexibility, but again, as we said, the basic ideas of like the Ten Commandments have to be there in principle, and that's what informs the social order. And then areas of flexibility might be things like what kinds of penalties are exacted for, serious moral failings or, evil actions or whatever. I believe the death penalty should be in place. There should be the death penalty for various offenses. So, the Russian church supports the death penalty. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer just to simply say that we would kind of look to the history of the church and the relationship of church and state and canon law.
So I got to ask, I went to a Catholic middle and high school, and I had to take a morality course. I think it was either my junior or senior year. And it was a joke. The teacher was good and the content was okay, I would say, but the class was a joke in the sense that all it was basically one big debate class over certain moral topics. But the one that was the most prevalent was the death penalty. And I think I'm with you that I support you for certain cases. But I guess why do you support the death penalty, and what instances do you support it in?
Well, again, what all of the different instances that might require the death penalty would also perhaps be subject to cultural situation. So you don't have to have like a one size fits all per se. But we as Orthodox would go first and foremost to Revelation. So we would look at Scripture. Secondly, we would look at the tradition of the church, the history of various Christian kings, monarchs, Orthodox princes, emperors, and we would look and see what the patterns and the precedent was for different cases. So there's not a one size, again, easy answer to that. But I think the more heinous crimes obviously should and do require death penalty. Murder, this kind of stuff, perhaps human trafficking, those kinds of things. And then, other issues could be perhaps debated to what degree you wouldn't have death penalty, but there's not an easy, simple answer to that question. And even the penal sanctions might be subject to some social and cultural norms. I mean, you might have some societies that view certain things worse than other societies, and so they might have a stiffer penalty for something like usury, right? Usury typically has been forbidden in Christian societies. Therefore, what would the penalty be for that? Well, you might have some hardliners who, like in Middle Eastern countries, maybe influenced by Islam, that would take a stiff response to that, and then maybe in other countries you wouldn't. I mean, so there's not an easy answer to that. But the precedent that we would say that exists in the Bible is what's called case law. And if you read Deuteronomy, you'll see these weird examples of situations where there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for every case. There's a basic principle. And from the case laws, you derive a principle that you then apply to similar cases. So this is where you have to have wise judges, elders, and canon lawyers or whatever who can comment on the cases and kind of give wisdom and insight. So what you asked is kind of a difficult question, but there's a great book on this. It's called The Ascent of Christian Law by John McGuckin.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you. Like, of course, like you can essentially get away with more depending on where the culture is, right? Like, what the culture believes is like really bad, then you can probably get away with killing, the person.
Right. So, I mean, in our society, we basically have reverted to a pagan society. I mean, that's where we are now. So there's not really we're not a Christian society. It's more like we're reverting to how the church was in the first 3 centuries in the Roman Empire, where it didn't have any social power and political power. So it has to kind of go back into that mode of kind of being persecuted and making converts, and probably eventually there will be martyrs.
All right. Now I know we're jumping around a little bit here, but I want to touch on government, especially now, because what I'm seeing in this in 2020, I guess, is a lot of people are becoming radicalized. A lot of people are ditching libertarianism because, the libertarian argument is essentially like, do what you want as long as you're not bothering me, whatever. A lot of people seem to be ditching that. I've seen a lot of people essentially just come out and become racist, essentially. What should be the government response to this? And I know we touched on a theory sort of overall shift in the morality of people's minds, but what is your ideal government response to the current situation of we got pedophilia, child porn on Netflix, stuff like that, TikTok problems, and then of course
I don't know how. I mean, I almost feel like the internet has to go away or something. Like, for how is all this stuff going to be fixed?
That would be good, honestly. I would be fine with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in the world before the internet, and things were a lot more wholesome, a lot simpler. I think.
But what would you do without my content? You won't be able to live without it.
I didn't even know you made content.
Okay, whatever. I gotta say, by the way, anytime I post something that's like science related or conspiracy or something, and you post it, that's like the seal of approval for me. I get so happy because I'm like, I get worried when I put stuff out there, and then I'll see like you and Jim Bob will like it and then share it or something, and I'll be so happy with myself.
Well,
Yeah. So anyway, I guess.
I'm glad I can make your day through my social media presence.
Well, now you make it sound gay.
I'm an influencer. What's your career choice, influencer?
What's my?
Yeah, well, all of that social media stuff is pretty damn gay, but I mean, I did an interview a few years ago, and the title of the show was something like "The Day Before the Internet Was a Good Day," because I remember the day before the internet, and I think it would have been a much better, more wholesome. I mean, obviously, you're never going to have no problems, but the kinds of problems that the internet has brought is just really. I mean, I can see just the degenerate nature of how society has gone in 20 years before the internet was prevalent. So I don't have an easy answer to how we get rid of it, other than eventually maybe just the internet goes away. I don't know how, but maybe it'll all just like kind of collapse or something. And I don't know.
That would be ideal for sure. But the internet definitely has, I mean, you can't really argue the internet has a lot of pros too, right? Like, for instance, you and I wouldn't be able to connect without the internet.
I just kind of, it seems like there could have been, I don't know, maybe since what is the deep state, basically gave everybody the internet for the purpose of social engineering. I've always said that. I've always thought that they're not going to give everybody the internet because they want to make everybody smart and, help everybody. I mean, no, these are completely devious, sociopathic, psychopathic people. It was always for social engineering and surveillance. It's a military technology given to the masses. I mean, come on. But, if they were going to do that, maybe they could have arranged it or organized it in some way to where, I don't know, it could have not been such a tool for fostering, degeneracy. I don't know how. I'm just thinking but I think that I think they knew that it would be like a giant, prawn engine, prawnography engine. And that was part of the reason they gave it, was to get people hooked on that, right? And then sort of disintegrate society on the basis of these kinds of things, promote degeneracy and so forth. So I don't think there is an easy way out. I just don't see how, unless they had just released it with I don't know, some kind of governors on it. I don't know.
Yeah, and another thing I'm seeing is I think people are also waking up to, essentially people are starting to ask themselves, what's the meaning behind this? Because oftentimes people see an article and they're just like, oh, this happened, oh my God. But they like there was an article recently about the English language spreading coronavirus more than every other language or something. You have to wonder, what is the point of that? Are they trying to get everyone to speak Hebrew and Spanish, or you just got to think why would you publish this? But
it's psychological warfare. It's a way to kind of, again, attack and undermine all of the aspects and underpinnings of the whole Western world. It's if you understand psychological warfare and demoralization and brutalization, it makes perfect sense why these things happen. If you don't understand that, you'll totally be lost. None of this makes any sense.
Yeah. I actually ran into a fan of yours recently. I knew you had a lot of followers.
With your car? Ha, ha, ha.
No. Okay. No. There's a guy who lives in my quad. His name's Gabriel, but he's Orthodox. He follows your stuff. I think he's in your Discord. I don't know.
Oh, cool.
But, yeah, he figured out I knew you because my roommate had mentioned we were going to be doing this stream. But we were talking recently about how insane it is, the amount of stuff and the amount of time we spend just consuming stuff that's essentially being thrown at us, even including books and podcasts, which might be more educational. When you go for a walk or a drive, you're always either listening to music or the radio or a podcast, and then you're reading or you're watching a movie or you're on social media playing video games.
Yeah.
Do you think it's essentially turning people's brains to I guess mush? But
yeah, it's a version of overstimulation and constant stimulation. This is another technique that they learned in psychological warfare and military time. If you remember well, you may not remember, but all of the Abu Ghraib and all that scandal. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have no clue what you're talking about.
So there was all these scandals in the early 2000s about how the military was torturing people in the camps, like the Muslims and people that they'd taken prisoner in war.
Okay.
Okay, and so some of the techniques that they used were these really bizarre techniques of like constant media stimulation, playing Britney Spears music really loud, nonstop. Constant media screen bombardment. So they were just doing a bunch of mind control experimentation on the people that they had taken to. And anyways, this leaked out and it was a big scandal. Let's just look up Abu Ghraib and the various prison camps. But it was just a bunch of mind control stuff, basically. So what I'm saying is that, yes, the notion of having never-ending stimulation through your devices and through constant media is itself a way to keep you in a heightened, agitated state so that you don't reflect on life or anything significant.
Yeah, even I find myself like addicted to just scrolling through stuff. But what do you do personally? Do you like? Are there times the day you take where you just say like, for these 2 hours or for this hour or 30 minutes, I'm just gonna have no technology? Like, how do you hold yourself accountable?
I try my best. It's really difficult given the fact that my job now is this stuff. So I'm like always looking at stuff now. Like I didn't used to, but I held out for a long time. And then the more that the audience expands, the more difficult that becomes, because it's just like never ending messages. You get hundreds of emails and messages every day. So it does get difficult, but we try to keep implementing the plans of like we turn the phone off at a certain time, me and Jamie. We try to make time to, do our prayers in the morning and evening, that kind of stuff. We do scripture reading every day. So those are the main things that help with that.
Yeah, I mean, even I don't receive nearly the amount of, I only have 300 subs, so I don't receive nearly the amount of attention, but I'll get DMs from requested DMs, and it'll be either a hate message or someone asking a question. I had someone ask questions this morning. I had multiple people. So it definitely is a thing that you feel like you have to be there to see it, like, because you do want to see as much as you can. You want to avoid like just ignoring people who watch your stuff, obviously. Right. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see, I want to go. So I guess we'll go back. We'll go full circle here. We'll go back to the beginning where we talked about essentially how action probably isn't the way to go, and I guess a overall mind shift, I guess I would call it. What was I going to say? I was just lost my complete train of thought. What did I just say to you? We were talking about, let's see.
We went from Byzantine legal theory to constant agitation through overstimulation via media and screens. And then what?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I had such a good... Let's see. Oh, okay. So I guess... And I know this is I kind of want to get in a specific example or to some degree, some sort of, how can we as individuals, and you kind of have like a job for this and you have an audience, of course, but we as individuals, if we want to make change in the sense of we want people, obviously we want each other to have better mental health, or, the world's going to go to crap essentially. So what can we do individually to help your sort of goal? Because I feel like a lot of people want that to happen, right? We want people to...
What do you mean my sort of goal?
Like if your goal is to, like, you're doing apologetics and stuff like that, like if you want societal order, I guess, as the end goal,
mm-hmm.
What can we do individually, like now? And I know we can't do like something gigantic, but what can we do in adversity, I guess?
In times of adversity?
Yeah.
To further the goals that I have?
Yeah.
Well, my challenge is always to not get lost in too many distractions, get lost in too many intellectual debates that kind of get in the way of my spiritual life. So my biggest challenge at this point is always getting distracted by worrying about the next debate, worrying about the next podcast, worrying about the next interview, worrying about the books I'm trying to do at this time, the next two. And then I let that dominate what I think about my whole mental scape. And I neglect the most important stuff, which is prayer, liturgy, scripture reading. That should be number one. And so I'm always getting that like backwards. So that's a big problem for me, as well as other, sins and stuff that get in the way. So I have to fix that stuff. That's really the only stuff that I can do is fix my own mistakes and messing up. I don't know what everybody else needs to do, but probably the same stuff I need to do.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I know that's like a really generic answer, but it really is the case. Like that's the biggest problem for me.
Yeah. I mean, I know we covered a very complex, obviously, topic today, and we couldn't obviously we can't get too much into it. But I do want to thank you for joining me. I wanted to keep this video somewhat short, just so that, people watch it. But
sure.
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
We can come back anytime, do it again.
We'll definitely do it again in the future.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Yep.